Zimmerman, I'd like to start with you, if we could, and discuss the supply chain issue. I noticed in your written testimony that your recommendations about logistics and just-in-time manufacturing, saying that they don't really work in your experience and observation when we're in the midst of a global event like the one we've just gone through. I certainly agree with that, and I'm wondering if you could just elaborate about your experiences at FEMA. What demonstrated to you that the just-in-time model is insufficient for a major crisis like the one that we've just gone through?
Great. Thank you, Senator. Right. The just-in-time, when we're working, especially in the medical supply chain, medical supply, the hospitals, what we've noticed is that they don't have supply on hand for much more than a few days. They require the just-in-time to replenish. They have their contracts so that they can get the supplies they need for their day-to-day operations come in, and they don't have to also have a huge warehouse to store them in. They rely on the private sector for doing that. So being able to get those commodities when you need them in the extreme amounts that we did during COVID in the early days and before manufacturing can get pulled up, it made it very critical. And that's when we saw that, there weren't supplies within the United States. We needed to go elsewhere. We needed to go to other countries. And when it was set up to bring in the commodities from other places. So the just-in-time can work fine in smaller events, just like the FEMA distribution centers that they have across the country. But that stockpile, the water and the blankets and the things that we need to protect lives and get things stabilized during normal natural disasters that FEMA works in. But when it really comes to a global event like this, just-in-time doesn't work when we don't have manufacturing ready to go to bring in those commodities at the numbers that were needed.
Well, I have been an advocate of reshoring our critical supply chains and introduced legislation to do that. And I think it's absolutely something that we have got to pursue and make a top priority. But you and I both know that process of onshoring will take time, and it's vital we do it. But that is a medium to long-term project that we need to start now. But in the short term, do you have any recommendations about how we can reduce our reliance on the just-in-time model and improve our resiliency in the midst of a major crisis? What can we do immediately that will have short-term implications or effects?
So I think immediately we need to look at what supplies are in hand. We look at the strategic national stockpile when it comes to COVID or any other pandemic and medical issue. Looking at those types of things, we always try to plan for those maximum events so that we have things. So really looking what we have there. Looking at when they use the Defense Production Act to change over manufacturing from cars to ventilators and that. So how do we really do that? But what are those key critical things that we need? And I think after the last year, we saw the PPE and the supplies that were needed by the medical first responders. So we need to make sure that we have a way of getting those within this country and how we stand up those abilities immediately when we see something happening. So I think this is an opportunity right now. We're still in the midst of the COVID-19. And where are we, now with getting commodities in and how we've resourced and been able to get things, even for the American people, the masks that people are wearing, the other supplies and things that we need. So looking at where we are today, and we need to accept where we are today, but what are those other things that we might need going forward? And we need to be prepared to supply those.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Mr. Nimitz, let me just give you a chance to weigh in here, given your experience at FEMA. Do you have a view on the supply chain question, whether that's stockpiling, as Ms. Zimmerman just said, stockpiling commodities or ramping up production on a temporary basis, or something different?
Not dramatically different, Senator, but you could tell from my body language, yes. I have some pretty strong opinions on the ability to move from just in time. And the national stockpile is a good thing, but it's not the only thing we can do. And we can, while we're bringing ashore the capacity and being able to understand the Defense Production Act and how we would utilize that in a future capability, we can incentivize hospitals and local medical capability to go over their efficient level, to be able to bring in and actually rotate the stock of medical equipment so that if it's in the national stockpile it doesn't go stale on the shelf and then have to be replaced at a larger cost. So I think we could look at ways of incentivizing hospitals and medical facilities to keep 110% of what their daily requirements are. And that 10%, if we incentivized it, the federal government or the states could reallocate to other areas. You've now distributed your stockpile across the nation, and it's closer to where you're going to need it whenever you need it.
And that's good. That's very interesting. Let me ask you about the Supply Chain Stabilization Task Force, led jointly by DoD and FEMA, which the last administration helped set up, or did set up to help coordinate and maximize the procurement of things like PPE. How well do you think that worked? I mean, what should we learn from that experience?
Like any task force, it took time to establish itself and understand each other's roles. When you, again, look at the Department of Defense, they understand the national defense industrial base. They know where the capabilities are. We don't try to create a comparable industrial base that we understand and we maintain, and it goes to your bringing back to shore the infrastructure to be able to do this. So I think the task force performed admirably once it had been established and they understood each other's roles. But you have to have, like DoD does, the infrastructure in place to understand how you're going to do this before an event. Creating it during the event reduces that time to perform.
Very good.
I'd just try to jump in here for a minute, if I could, with one additional suggestion. And we experienced both shortages in H1N1 and Ebola, and found that in different places in the private sector and in government, there were actually large supplies that were double and triple ordered, but the government didn't necessarily have the mechanism to go to all the manufacturers and distributors and ask where it was in the system. So clarifying authorities for it to be able to do that in an emergency, you can see where it is and redistribute it quickly, I think would be very, very helpful.
That is helpful. Thank you. I see my time has expired. I'll have a few more questions, Dr. Gerberding, for you, and Dr. Lurie for you as well, for the record. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.